I urge you, expand the safety area, keep the density down. Thank you.
There's no motion required on this measure, so without seeing any other comments, I would ask that we go to item 7.
Thank you, Chair Williams. Item 7, Draft Measure A Program of Projects. Hold a public hearing to review and comment on Draft Measure A Program of Projects for fiscal years 2022-23 to 2026-27.
Ms. Mata.
There you go. Thank you, Chair and Directors. I'm Jackie Mata, Transportation Planner for SBCAG. Today I will be presenting the Draft Measure A Program of Projects. This is for the next 5 fiscal years, which are 22-23 to 26-27. And the Program of Projects is required annually and shows how every dollar of Measure A funding will be spent by SBCAG, local agencies, and transit operators. And only projects that are included in the approved Program of Projects, or POP, are eligible for Measure A funding. So the POP consists of the local and authority Program of Projects. The local POP is developed by local agencies, and these funds are used for any local street and transportation improvement. Each local agency was required to adopt a POP for their respective share of funding after holding a public meeting. The authority Program of Projects, also known as the regional POP, is developed by SBCAG and Santa Barbara MTD. And these are named projects identified in the Measure A investment plan. Next slide, please. So during this time, we will have about $49.2 million available for allocation in fiscal year 22-23, and an estimated $253 million over the 5-year period. And of that amount, 58% goes to local agencies as local pass-through, and then 42% goes to regional projects. Next. And then in terms of local investment, as you can see from the pie chart, local agencies are using 63% of their local pass-through funds for maintenance of streets and roads investments. And then the second highest category being used for alternative transportation investments. Next slide. One investment included in the regional program is for specialized transit. Approximately $2.5 million is going to be invested for specialized transit for our transit operators. And an example of this in the North County is Smooth, which is a great transit service for the elderly and disabled. Next slide, please. And then this slide shows 2 projects that were completed from the Regional Bike Ped and Safe Routes to School competitive program in the South Coast. So the project on the left is the county's Auburn Trail pavement maintenance projects, and on the right is Coast's Safe Routes to Schools program. So in the North County, projects from Cycle 3 are still in progress, and in the South Coast, Cycle 5 projects are scheduled for approval by your board next month. An example of a regional project is Highway 166 safety and operational improvements, which includes adding passing lanes, turning lanes, widening shoulders, and enhanced enforcement. Next slide, please. And then another investment in the regional POP is the US 101 Multimodal Corridor Project, which is one of our named projects in the regional POP. Measure A has provided us with a match to be able to compete very well in Senate Bill 1's competitive grant programs. And this has helped us fund segments 4A through 4C, which are currently all under construction. Next slide. And this slide shows the schedule. So the draft program of projects was presented to the Technical Transportation Advisory Committee earlier this month, and no comments were received. Today, we're holding a public hearing for feedback, and then next month, we will present the final program of projects to TTAC again, and then to your board for approval. And this concludes my presentation. So I hope this gave you a good overview of how we're using Measure A on the local and the regional level. Any questions?
Any questions from the directors? About North County and Zoom? Any public comment?
Chair Williams, we have no request for public comment.
Okay, there is not a motion needed, so that we will go to item 8.
Okay, item 8 is Rincon.
Thank you, Ms. Mata.
Item 8, Rincon Multi-Use Trail. Receive an update from SBCAG and City of Carpinteria staff on recent developments on the Rincon Multi-Use Trail project. 8B, consider approval of the request by the City of Carpinteria to use funds for the study of other alternatives.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and board members. Fred Luna, SBCAG staff. So the item before the board today is looking for an approval action from the board for funding that was previously authorized for this project back in January, if you recall, for an effort that the City of Carpinteria was taking to finalize an EIR and move a project alternative forward for the Rincon Trail project. As you recall, at that time, we had a number of discussions over 2 meetings related to the time constraints for the project and the fact that we had a delivery schedule of August of 22 to submit a project for construction allocation. So that deadline still exists and is on, and we're trying to move forward towards that. So the consideration today before the board would be at the request of the City of Carpinteria, looking to use the funds that were authorized by the SBCAG board for some additional work as a result of city council action in March 28th. So today, the presentation you'll receive is an overview today from myself, and then city staff are also on the Zoom webinar. Matt Roberts, the city parks director, and Nick Bobroff, the principal planner at the city, are on to present what transpired at the March City Council meeting and what the request is of the city to the SBCAG board related to the funding. Following the city's presentation, I'll bring it back and I'll summarize, and then we can turn it over to the board for discussion. So just by way of providing some background, in December and January of this year, we conducted 2 lengthy meetings and discussions with this board to talk about and provide a status update on the Rincon project. At that time, not only were we outlining the delivery schedule for the project and the fact that there were a number of critical milestones that still needed to occur between early in the year, and now we're 3 or 4 months into that already, and August of 22. That's a hard deadline. I want to reinforce again, we already had received a time extension for the funding of the construction phase for the active transportation program funds, and there's approximately $6 million at stake there. So during the course of the SBCAG board meetings, we presented a number of options that the city was considering in their EIR. And the fact that the city had selected an environmentally superior alternative, which was called Alternative 3, and that was the alternative that the city put forth as the alternative to present to the City Planning Commission. That was approved, and then there was an appeal process that city staff will talk about that. The hearing was held at the council on March 28th, and so we'll get into that shortly as to what transpired there. Furthermore, the board heard various funding options. If you recall, there were options for considering funding for both the project development work that would be required to look at Alternative 3 and developing that focus CIR and the design to get a project that was construction ready and ready for submitting the allocation paperwork to the California Transportation Commission. There were a number of other alternatives, some which were supported by various stakeholders, and you heard a number of them come to this board and speak to that effect. They also showed up at the City Planning Commission and at the City Council appeal hearing. So staff, SBCAG staff presented what is considered a highly critical schedule at the time, that a number of things needed to fall in place to be successful to deliver that project. And one of the first things that needed to occur was approval action by the City Planning Commission on the environmental document and the coastal permit, and then allowing that to move forward without appeal. So we're here to say, and the city staff will mention, that there was an appeal that was received on the project, and then the hearing at the council was conducted to hear the appeal. So that there's still a number of items that still need to occur, and that would add criticality to the schedule. In fact, it is SBCAG staff's opinion that just because of that delay and the fact that it's highly unlikely that we would be able to achieve the success in delivering the project going forward to meet that August date, because as you would probably recall, some of those other alternatives weren't nearly as evolved in their design, and so a lot more work would need to get them to a point where we would be able to prepare a construction allocation package for approval. The SBCAG board ultimately did approve an action to award $550,000 for project development funding from our Regional Surface Transportation Program. And that was, as I mentioned before, to advance Alternative 3 to a point of construction readiness. The board did defer any action on construction funding pending further updates. Today's board meeting does provide the update on what particularly happened at the appeal at the city planning, following the city's planning commission. And then before I hand it over to city staff, I'd be open to answering any questions. And then, as I indicated before, city staff, Matt Roberts and Nick Bobroff, are on the Zoom webinar and can provide a summary of what transpired at the March meeting, and then what direction the city council had given their staff, and then the request for additional funding. The request to use the funding that was approved for other studies on the project. So any questions of the board, and then I'll hand it over to city staff.
Well, I'm still, what is the new orientation that the appeal pointed towards, and that by upholding the appeal, the city council essentially asked to move forward with analysis? And I guess my second question is, so this is confirming they could continue to use the 550, but they essentially, by this move, forfeit the rest of the money that we committed them.
So I'll answer the second part first, and I think the first part is probably best answered by the city and when they give their presentation as to what exactly was the outcome of the city council meeting, the direction to staff. So the second part was related to the funding. So there's essentially ATP funding, and then there's RSTP funding on this project, and then it's broken into buckets of what's for pre-construction and for construction. So there's currently ATP pre-construction money that the city is able to use right now and available for the project development work. And then the board approved an additional $550,000 in RSTP in January for additional pre-construction work. That's all on the table. I think the city's request is that $550 in RSTP funding be used not specifically to advance the construction readiness of Alternative 3, because they're wanting to look at other options or other alternatives. And so that was different than what the board had directed. And so we're coming back to the board if the board would choose to approve the use of that funding. The construction funding is a separate bucket that's not already, it's programmed, but it's not authorized. It hasn't been allocated. And so we would need to submit information that shows we're prepared to, we're at a point where we can deliver that project, and that's where we have concerns that project, any work to advance that project or whatever project that the city desires is not going to be ready by August. Did that answer your question, Director Williams?
It does. Maybe instead of get in deep into this, we should let the city make their presentation first.
So if there's not any other questions, I don't, if Matt or Nick are on Zoom right now, they can provide a summary of the city's actions and the request.
Any other questions before we allow the city to go forward? Directors? Okay. Mr. Roberts?
Yes, hello, Matt Roberts here, City of Carpenteria's Parks Director, and I'm accompanied with Nick Bobroff, who's the principal planner, who was the staff at the appeal hearing. The city council direction, and I'll let Nick provide more precise detail, but generally speaking, they conditionally upheld the appeal with direction to staff to further analyze what we called Alternative 4 and Alternative 2. Staff believes that Alternative 4 is more likely to be a viable route because of geotechnical issues and drainage issues that are wrapped up into Alternative 2. So far, the engineering delivery team has looked at Alternative 4 in more detail preliminarily and feels as though it's a viable option. It is spoken to in the draft EIR. So it may be possible that, and because Alternative 4 was analyzed there, that the EIR can be found complete for Alternative 4. And we're hoping that the paragliding community will see how that is evolving to meet their needs as well. But I'll let Nick give more details about the appeal hearing.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning, Chair Williams and SBCAG board members. I think Matt did a good job of providing, Matt and Fred provided a good high-level overview. The EIR found that Alternative 3 was the preferred alternative, and the Planning Commission agreed with that finding and approved it. However, the soaring community was in near unanimous opposition to Alternative 3. They're really concerned that Alternative 3, by crossing across the bluff face that they rely upon for their soaring activities, would be detrimental to their activities. And it seemed that the council found their arguments persuasive and directed us to go back and take a look at these other alternatives that might be a compromise solution, if you will, that would have less impact on soaring activities occurring in the area and still hopefully meet most of the project objectives. And so, as Matt said, the council ultimately directed us to go back and provide some additional information and take a closer look at alternatives 2 and 4, and to also try to work with members of the soaring community to see if we can find some common ground on a revised solution. And most of the effort to date's been looking at making some refinements to Alternative 4 to do exactly that. And so that's what we've been working on, and we're hoping to present our refined version of Alternative 4 to the soaring community here in the near future. And if we can get their buy-in on this refinement, then bring that back to our council in the hopes of moving forward with this revised alternative.
Can you
I would
can you
just add
explain
that-
what the
oh, go ahead.
orientation is in option 4? I mean, it's awesome that there's seems to be an amicable solution, but I still want to understand it. And
Sure.
maybe understand why this is so great that we are now further endangering the funding.
Chair Williams, so all of the alternatives follow the same alignment from the western starting point in the city at Carpenter Avenue and Highway 150, and parallel the 101 on-ramp there from Highway 150 down to the railroad crossing, and even the bridge across the railroad crossing. And then on the south side of the railroad tracks is where the different alignments diverge. So Alternative 3 used to hang a right once we get across the railroad tracks and traverse across the ocean side of the bluff face. And Alternative 4 instead would turn to the left and traverse across the backside of the Bates Ridge that divides the highway from, or separates the highway from the ocean. And so our refinement to Alternative 4 still follows that inland side of that Bates Ridge, but has been refined to further reduce the amount of earthwork needed affecting that ridge line and the ridge top. So we're really trying to minimize our impacts to landform modification and to the ridge feature that the hang gliding or soaring community relies upon for their flying activities. So that's what our focus has been, is trying to really just tighten up our impact there and reduce the amount of earthwork needed to that ridge line.
Director Hart?
Do we have any visual aids to help us understand this alignment?
We,
If I'm able to share a screen, I can pull it up.
oh, great.
Thank you, Nick.
Let me see if I can find it here rather quickly.
And then while you're pulling that up, maybe I'll just add, so does the council then want still, I mean, I guess what is the council's disposition on the construction funding? You know, I mean, how do you, I'm glad that there's an amicable solution met, and that helps me from maybe having the soaring community happy with me. But does that mean you guys have given up on the construction funding? Because I don't know, how else would we make the August deadline?
Chair Williams, my impression is that we cannot deliver the project in time to receive the construction funding if we proceed with this new alternative. We're continuing to refine this design, but there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done, and I don't see us being able to have construction-ready drawings in place by August if we pursue alternative 4.
And I just want to make sure that, you know, and of course, Director Clark could speak to this. The council is aware of that, right? And I mean, do you have a prospective idea of how you guys are going to procure construction funding in the future?
To your first question, Chair Williams, it was disclosed in the City Council staff report that we are facing this deadline on the funding, and that the construction funding was at risk pending any further delays of the project design. And that goes for any of the design alternatives, including alternative 3, had it been held up in continued appeals with Coastal Commission or through the county's process for their piece of the trail as well. In terms of alternative funding sources, we don't have anything in place yet that we're specifically looking at. However, Caltrans is obligated to complete this project as a condition of approval of the Linden Casitas and Casitas Pass Interchanges project. And so our expectation is that we would continue to work with Caltrans to find alternative funding sources to cover construction costs.
Any other questions from the directors? How are we doing on that visual, Mr. Lynn?
Oh, it was up,
Okay, good.
but now it's not. And I don't know if there's a way we can get it on the bigger screen. But basically, what's the people on Zoom are probably seeing it better than the people in this room. But there's 4 alternatives, and Nick was describing that they all are the same on the western side. It's trying to maintain as much of the same project. And then make the change that was the critical factor with the soaring community regarding the grading. And so trying to maintain the alignment of the bridge across, and then that's where the divergences occur. And as Nick noted, the alternative 4 runs along the freeway, still needing to be engineered. I know the city's had a number of recent meetings to kind of look at that a little bit more closely, but as I mentioned previously, that design was not nearly as evolved as the previous design, which was the supported coastal trail design on the coastal bank, but that did require that larger excavation amount. As the city noted, and SBCAG concurs, that delivery of that modified project would be unlikely and would jeopardize the ATP funding. What's before the board today is consideration of allowing the city to move forward with, as Director Williams said, a compromise solution perhaps, that would allow them to kind of more fully define and evolve the impacts and costs related to this new alternative through design. It would have, and then look at the environmental and the design further. And then at some point in the future, a decision on construction funding would have to be evaluated.
Director Hart?
Has there been an opportunity to talk with the Coastal Commission staff about their perception and view of this new alternative?
Board Member Hart, we have not met with coastal staff yet to discuss alternative 4 in more detail.
Well, I just think this is really in a bad spot. I'll just state the obvious. Losing the money from the ATP grant is pretty foundational to this project, and these changes are, I think, going to not be well received by the Coastal Commission. And I would urge you to engage with them as soon as possible, because spending more money and chasing down a path that couldn't be supported by the Coastal Commission staff isn't in anybody's interest. And this project's in really tough spot, and I don't know that the city's position that it's Caltrans's problem is really constructive and going to add to the resolution of this. I appreciate everybody trying hard and working together, but this is becoming a serious dilemma for this board.
Yeah, I'd highly advise speaking to the commission and, ask that the messaging be consistent. When the Soaring community asked me, for instance, why can't we just do the behind the hill option? I repeated what you guys had told me, which is that the commission did not view that as favorable. So I want to understand whether that's true or not, because I don't like to repeat stuff unless it's true. And Mr. Roberts, you owe me a call from 2 months ago, so maybe we should get in better coordination and cooperation on these projects.
And through the chair, I'd like to just add that this is a sort of an interesting dilemma. This has always been a very challenging area for transportation projects, as evidenced by the massive amount of earth moving that occurred when the railroad and the freeway were rerouted through Rincon Mountain. And our preference was alternative 3. We found that it was environmentally superior. We also found that it met most, or if not all, of the project objectives as a coastal trail. And the fact that now we're being directed to look at alternative 4 is the path that we've been directed. And it is, based on what I've seen in the project delivery team's exploration with greater detail of alternative 4, a viable one. It will serve most of the project objectives, and it will make this critical link between Ventura and Santa Barbara County as a bike and pedestrian route. And so I think that's very important to deliver this project in some way, shape, or form. In my opinion, just personally, it's unfortunate that it might not have as much ocean and blue water view as it could, but it will also, at the end of the day, be an excellent project that will get a tremendous amount of public support once installed and delivered.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, from what I have ascertained in my own community, the community of Carpinteria, many people very excited about this kind of connection, and it would be a well-used trail and worth all the heartache and funding. So hopefully we will see that day when we can all look to it being worth it. Mr. Hart.
Well, I think I agree with that sentiment 100%. I think this board has been very clear and strongly supportive of this project. We understand how important it is from a regional connectivity standpoint, critical link of the coastal trail. But the real issue here, separate from we agree, is what does the Coastal Commission think? And we need to have an answer to that before we do anything, because I don't think it's responsible for us to spend money on a design that isn't going to be well received. If the city wants to spend its money on that's perfectly reasonable, and I'd support that. Curious what Director Clark has to say about the matter.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. I've been trying to figure out how to get the hand raised option going, but it's not working for me now, but thank you for calling on me. This from the city council perspective, the city council unanimously agreed that they're in strong favor of the project. There were a number of reservations with option number 3, and maybe seeing those sooner in more detail would have helped. But a primary one was a safety feature having to do with dumping the trail out into the county parking lot. The trail just at the point just before it empties into the parking lot has a more significant grade leading to potential for higher speeding. It's already a very tight, the county parking lot there is already very, very tight. And a member of our architectural review board actually had a very serious bicycle accident there. And so, we were promised that the county was going to rework the parking lot later, but in terms of an EIR hearing, that sounded like a deferred mitigation that I couldn't really go along with at that point because it wasn't in place. And the other feature was that the council didn't agree with was the extensive amount of earthwork that had to be done, and making a giant cut into an already severely cut mountain didn't sound very stabilizing. And so we're in unanimous support of the project. We just wanted to get more information about 2 of the other alternatives.
Director Uhrig, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair Williams. Just again, wanted to reiterate that I feel that the decision that Council made was a very prudent one, given again the environmental impact with all of the dirt that would need to be removed. And so this option 4 that's kind of crept up on us or kind of jumped out at us is really a kind of very nice to be able to see that. And I'm wondering if somehow that we could still allocate some funding to get at least the pedestrian bridge, that portion of the pedestrian bridge finished, because I believe that was at one point one of the options, at least my recollection, there was an option of finishing it to the pedestrian bridge, and then once hopefully we would have or the city would have the commission approval to go ahead with option 4, then at least that part could have funds already allocated, and that would move the project forward. Just a thought.
I really appreciate that, Director. That's the suggestion I made both to the city and to Director Clark and to the soaring community in December, which would have been enough, in theory, maybe enough time to meet the project objectives. Is there a reason why the council just didn't go for the 2-stage project so we might be able to build some of this?
Mr. Chair, I'll defer to city staff, but I believe that our information was that original grant that's threatened was really to complete the whole trail, and so it wasn't for building half of a trail. Even though I might personally agree with that as a very good compromise, or at least stopgap measure or partial completion of the trail. We were led to understand that the grant wouldn't permit such a thing.
Mr. Luna, is that your understanding too? Because I thought that alternative was presented to us in the December meeting.
We did present an option that included a two-step process. As a potential, it did have a number of caveats, if you recall in the discussion, particularly including the fact that we would have needed at that time to get approval from the California Transportation Commission on that approach, whether it was fulfilling the objectives of the original grant application. We later did find out through meetings, and I think it was documented in the staff report, that that would require what was considered a kind of a major scope change to the project. And so that would require approval at the full California Transportation Commission and time, and so then was the time to pull the trigger or even further if that was the determination of the council or the board to undertake that. So now we're at a point where that would require at least 2 meetings of the California Transportation Commission, and time's not on our side. So.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Chair Williams, Director Patino would like to speak.
Director Pertino.
I thought I was being, anyway, my concerns at the last meeting were that we weren't going to be able to meet the deadline in August. And I think Commissioner Hart has probably a real good pulse on what goes on at the Coastal Commission. And this even pushes it out further. But for clarity, does that take that $550,000 off of the table, or is it still on the table?
So the request by the city today, if it wasn't clear in the staff report, was to ask that this board consider use of the $550,000 that was approved in January for further studies to look at alternatives 2 and 4 as the city council had directed. I should say that there is still money available from the ATP funding. There's a balance of funding in the project development funds. So we could have the city draw on that first if the board would choose to, approve the funding, or that could be the extent of the funding that they would use. Since there's tends to be an understanding that a project may not be able to be achieved for construction allocation, there are certain activities that are no longer going to be needed, and we could reprioritize budget from that current work item that was programmed under ATP for this work. That would be another option for the board.
But we don't know specifically what they're going to be using that for, I guess.
They're going to be, my understanding, city staff can speak up, is they're going to be doing preliminary design and environmental work related to some of the other alternative options to further evaluate the environmental impacts. And then they'll assess what environmental process is needed, but city staff can confirm that.
Well, I guess my point is that's real general, it's not specific. So for us to even vote on that today. Thank you, Mr. Luna.
Through the chair. I might just add
Is that Mr. Roberts?
Yes, thank you. Alternative 4 has a bigger footprint than alternative 3, in that the trail is connected all the way down to Bates Road. So there's an area that just needs empirical and probably a little bit of geophysical evaluation. Again, there is a different archaeological site footprint with the bigger project, and there's some soils analysis that wasn't done down there. I think utility coordination and US 101 separation issues are well understood in alternative 4. I think the overall grading is understood, but it just takes some more detailed analysis to be sure that there aren't any critical flaws in that option. So that will require some additional funding or reprogramming of existing funding. And I think it's really important that be granted as soon as possible, The other point is that we can certainly reach out to coastal staff on transportation matters and get their opinion of alternative 4 to make sure that they can support it before we actually spend any reallocation of funds. Thank you.
Does that satisfy you, Director Hart?
Does the city, or yeah, this is for SBCAG staff. Does the city still have the $1 million Measure A local project allocation, or have they spent that on another project?
They do have a portion of that left. Mr. Kachek or can probably, I think.
Well, that's an out of left field question, so I totally don't
Yeah.
expect you to know.
We'd have to check.
But that's another potential source of funding for this next round of review. And I do appreciate Mr. Roberts, engaging with the Coastal Commission staff to find out if this is a viable alternative.
Mr. Chair, if I'm
Yes, Director Kern.
I'm trying not to muddy the waters anymore, but I do want to make a point that we made to the city when we met with them earlier this week, is that the project could apply for additional ATP funding in the future. However, when we applied for, on behalf of the Caltrans and the city for this project, SBCAG took the lead agency status in the application because we wanted to see this project funded. So we were SBCAG was the applicant and grantee. If there is an additional application for additional money, my recommendation is SBCAG not be the applicant, because there is a deduction of points when you fail to obligate the money that was originally programmed to any agency. So there's a failure to perform punishment, and so we would not compete very well if we were the applicant in the future. So I just want to lay that on the table and make sure that that's part of the public record, that I would not recommend that SBCAG be the applicant in any future applications for this project, for ATP and other funds that involve the CTC. Is that correct? Correct. So thank you.
I think that's important. And so can we get clarification from city staff that you would be the applicant for the future applications instead of SBCAG in this case?
Yes, Chair Williams. I think there might be two options. One could be the city and the other could be Caltrans. I believe the rules allow for Caltrans now to apply, but I could be corrected. But I was under the impression that is a possibility for Caltrans to be a direct applicant.
Great. Any other questions, comments from board members?
This is Director Hartman. Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, Director Hartman.
So I just wanted further clarification about the point that Margie just made. Is if the applicant can't deliver, then if there's a future application by that applicant, is it only for that specific project? Or if SBCAG applies for other projects, are we penalized because we didn't deliver on this one?
It's the latter option. We are punished for any application moving forward until we can prove that we've delivered a project successfully.
That's sobering.
So let's make sure we repeat that in a way that any member of the public can understand. So the City of Carpinteria's change of plans will penalize us in our application for the funding to complete the 101 project.
Sorry, somebody was whispering to my ear.
So the failure, so the change of plan will penalize our application to the CTC that we have a do or die strategy on for the first meeting of the CTC next year for completion of the 101 project.
Good question, and we were a little distracted. The question is, will this hurt our application process for the SB1 process as well?
Chair Williams, The point deduction is specific to the active transportation program. And so the process of evaluation of projects for the SB1 competitive programs that we're seeking funding for would not be impacted.
So it's future ATP applications, not other CTC applications.
Correct, yeah.
Correct.
So the,
Okay, so I
th-
misspoke on that. So thank you for
think
that clarification.
And the other point I was going to make, I think Director Kern mentioned that it's not the project that gets impacted, it's the agency that gets impacted for future ATP applications.
Mr. Chair, I misspoke when I said other funding programs. So I think, thank you for Mr. Kachek for correcting me on that. Thank you.
Well, my opinion is that this is a mess. Hopefully, it's a mess that will yield a project that there's wider consensus in the community on. But in the meantime, it's a mess and endangers maybe the future of the project. But I would maintain it is still a worthwhile project, something that the community of Carpinteria, yearns for. It's a glaring gap in the connectivity of our community. I mean, essentially, you can bike or walk from Ventura all the way up to Rincon right now, but right at the county line, it stops. And this would connect our communities with Point South in a way that will be good for recreation and possibly more. And I still think it's a worthwhile effort, even with, and maybe this change of plan ultimately we'll look back and be happy about it in the meantime, and I think it's worth persevering and allocating, approving the request by the city of Carpinteria. Any other discussion? Is there a motion?
Chair Williams, we have one request for public comment. Mr. Scott Wins.
Mr. Wentz.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Scott Wins representing Kaiser Basic. 15 years ago, when this plan was first proposed, having to do with the change of the Rincon and the Butterfly Highway, we opposed it. We said, it can't be done on a reasonable manner. This is a dollar versus people item. How many people are you going to get to do this? Look what happened with Naomi Schwartz and the Ortega Ridge Bike Path. Failed. Salud Carbajal, when he was sitting in your chair, Director, said the outcomes did not meet the goals. He made the same comment when it came to the Jamison Lane, Bike Lane, and Multimodal Path. The city of Santa Barbara has failed miserably when it came to this, and we have 3 members of the city of Santa Barbara or former members of the city council who have heard the numbers drop dramatically when it came to active transportation. The state of California is trying to ramrod high-density, multi-level, 4- and 5-story buildings in the communities along the coast and say, we're going to solve this through active transportation. We're going to get people out and walking and biking. They haven't been able to do it in 40 years. And the comments by the now governor stating that he was going to take $6 billion of the gasoline tax for bicycle pass was a slap in the face for everybody that does any commuting to work. This has to stop. You connect the dots, and you're going to see more come down the pike when it comes to the city of Santa Barbara and Cliff Drive. Talk about another stupid item, but that's not what we're discussing here. We projected, we were correct, the dollars versus people is a stupid plan. Just because somebody wants it in a community. Have many friends. I taught down in Carpinteria. I have many friends down there. And I can tell you right now, those people are saying there's no more than 20-30% of the people in Carpinteria that want this plan. You think you're going to get people to bike from Ventura to Carpinteria to go to work, or Carpinteria to Ventura? Not going to happen. This is a bad plan. ATP has failed statewide, and it's failing in the county. You need to just cancel this program.
It's to the board.
Chair Williams, there's someone with their hand raised real quick. Who is it? Oh, it's an attendee. I have Mr. Barry Remus would like to make a comment from the public.
Thank you. And we'll close public comment after this.
Go ahead, Mr. Remus.
Mr. Bemis?
Good morning, Chair Williams and SBCAG board members. My name is Barry Remus, and I'm representing SB Bike Plus Coast, the Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition, and the Coalition for Sustainable Transportation. We've been following this project and have spoken and submitted public comment to the city of Carpinteria along the way. We've also met with Mr. Roberts and staff. And one of the things that I just wanted to point out as you move into deliberation and make your decisions here is that for the benefit of the overall goals of the project, which is to be able to deliver and close the connection gap in the coastal trail, the California Coastal Trail, and to deliver not only bicyclists but also pedestrian, potentially equestrian access. We would like you to consider allowing the city to be able to pursue the use of the $500,000+ in the ATP funds to be able to pursue their city council's request for the study of the alternatives 4 and 2. Because just one thing to keep in mind is that while the construction funding is in jeopardy with the August deadline, if that doesn't occur and the alternative 3 option continues, it's probably almost undoubted that the appellants from the city council hearing will probably appeal to the Coastal Commission, which would only further delay the project as well. And then one other thing to point out is that the interest of the alternative 4 not just benefit to the soaring community, but also to be able to provide truly direct access and connection of the Rincon Trail straight into the beginning of the Ralph Fertig Memorial Trail on Bates Road, which would again be able to provide that direct connection rather than the current alignment in alternative 3, which would terminate at the parking lot of the Rincon Beach parking lot, which Coast and SB Bike do have concerns among many other people about the safety element for that as well, and to be able to provide safe and separated access for bicyclists and pedestrians through that parking lot is not a part of this project. It would have to wait for another project to occur in the future to find funding for that. So we would like to give the chance to be able to allow the city to be able to pursue the study on alternatives 2 and 4. And as Mr. Roberts mentioned, it may not take that much more to be able to provide the EIR to be able to justify the alternative 4 alignment, perhaps. But we'd like to urge your consideration of that so that the project could potentially move through, at least in a manner that accommodates multiple and perhaps all users of the trail. Thank you very much. Hey, good afternoon.
Thank you. It's to the board. Any comment? Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'll go ahead and move that we allow the city to use the $500,000 to pursue study of the alternative suggested. Thank you.
I will second. Any discussion on the motion? I'll just note that I think that this characterization that people are not biking and walking and not using active transportation, I just ask people to go around Carpinteria or even downtown Santa Barbara a little bit more to know that things have dramatically changed in the last couple of years. There are more people getting out of their car to recreate than ever. Of course, the trick is how we could do it to reduce VMT during commute hours. That would be the trick if we got that, but it's a start that it's happening as a method of recreation. And that might help us create the kind of changes that would facilitate better movement of goods and commuters. But for now, it matters and would be progress if we can do that for people to recreate.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Director Hartman?
before we vote, I'm inclined to support this, but I do think finding out from Coastal Commission staff where they stand so that we're not spending money where they're adamantly opposed to an option.
I did hear that commitment from Mr. Roberts and who's the Parks Director from the City of Carpinteria to do that. So,
But it wasn't in our motion, so just want to make sure it's not lost.
Absolutely. Thank you,
I'd be
Director
happy
Hartman.
to. I'd be happy to modify my motion in that regard.
Do you want to articulate how? I obviously will support it, Director Clark.
Well, I don't know. I guess I don't have enough information about what all is involved in contacting the Coastal Commission and how long that takes. I mean, I'd sort of like to see the process start happening and then be informed by the Coastal Commission as soon as we can find out. But since time may be of the essence here, I think it's important to jump on it and then find out. I know that sounds a little awkward, but I think that maybe that's the best way.
How's this for a suggestion? Just A and B contingent upon City of Carpinteria's consultation with the Coastal Commission staff. Is that simple enough? I'm not even micromanaging a timeline. I'm just. Is that good?
Yep.
Great. So
So
that's
to-
a motion by
clarify.
Director Clark and a second by Director Williams for A and B contingent upon consultation by the City of Carpinteria with Coastal Commission staff.
Well, does consultation mean that the Coastal Commission's going to support the design? Or are we just talking to them?
I'm not sure that level. I mean, even though I 100% agree with what you're trying to do, the Coastal Commission staff isn't always 100% clear. So I think that hopefully they will be in this case, but making them move forward on the project contingent upon clarity from the commission staff is something that might not be in their control.
Well, that's probably a fair assessment of reality. But I also think we just need to say it out loud, is that we're not going to make the deadline. We're going to lose $6 million. These things are happening now. And what is the total estimated cost of this version of the project? The alternative 3?
Yeah, as presented earlier this year, it was around 16 to 18 million. So we were asking the board at that time to consider an additional $12 million. This is a much longer project. We know very little about the revised alternatives, so that would be information that would be revealing as a result of this process. But it might, be a larger and more costly project too.
Yeah, I think that underlines it. And so I personally, want this project to happen for all the reasons that Supervisor Williams described, and at the same time, pretty frustrated. And I think it's the responsibility of the city to come up with the money to do this design revision. So I'm not going to support the motion, reluctantly and tragically and sadly.
Mr. Chair.
Director Clark?
Yeah, if I might add, it was noted that the very high cost of this project was primarily due to a lot of earth moving that had to happen. And there'll be substantially less earth moving with alternative number 4. as was discussed today. And so, you know, I understand what Director Hart is saying, but I think it may end up being a wash or even less money just due to the less intensive work needed to be done for this alternative. It's kind of more of an alternative that lays with the land rather than destroying it.
Further discussion? There's a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Director Hart,
No.
Hartman,
Aye.
Levanino,
No.
Eurig,
Aye.
Julian,
No.
Sierra, oh, she's absent. Osborne,
No.
Patino,
No.
Kasdan,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Rouse,
No.
and Chair Williams.
Aye.
Uh,
That's
It's tied.
only 5 votes.
Six.
5 to 6.
5. I believe that fails.
Yeah.
You have to have a majority of the full board to
Right.
pass any item.
I'd recommend that staff work with the Coastal Commission, find out whether there's a viable project here, and then come back and we'll consider it in light of that information.
I think that is probably what we'll have to have. Okay. With a heavy heart, let's move on to item, unless there's a further motion.
Do we need to have a motion to continue this to the next meeting after speaking with Coastal Commission? Okay.
So just to make it clear, because our about our procedure is you can, we can agendize something for next meeting. We all need to be really clear with the public. I don't like that when people say that the construction funding is endangered. It's dead. There's no way we can make the August deadline now. It's dead, it's dead, it's dead, it's dead. Nobody should be saying anything else to the public. That $6 million is gone. And so, though I want us to approve this, I can understand how some of my board members want to know that this project has a future before they do so. So we'll plan on agendizing it next time if you all can meet with the commission staff in the meantime. Okay, let's go on to item 9.
Thank you. Item 9, funding opportunity for Sandbar US 101 multimodal corridor through federal multimodal projects discretionary grant opportunity. 9A, receive presentation on availability of funding through federal notice of funding opportunity by U.S. Department of Transportation through the multimodal project discretionary grant opportunity. 9B, authorize submittal of grant application to U.S. Department of Transportation for Santa Barbara Highway 101 HOV project, segment 4D South, at a request of $90 million.
Thank you, Chair, Director Sarkis Kachek with SBCAG. So I'm going to speed us up a little bit, but we do have an exciting and dynamic time right now with seeking funding for the remaining projects in the corridor for Santa Barbara US 101. Next slide, please. So as the motion mentioned, we'd like to get your feedback today on our path forward with the current federal opportunity. And then we also wanted to update you on other activities that are underway. But per your board's direction, we are actively and aggressively pursuing every opportunity we can, whether it's state, federal, or other. In the short term, we do have opportunities through the state budget to ask for funding through the budget surplus for transportation, so that's happening. We also have this federal opportunity that I'll talk about today. In the long term, we also have additional opportunities through Senate Bill 1 through the competitive programs we mentioned previously. But there you can see the tools in the toolbox to help us seek full funding. Next slide, please. We did want to let your board know that Caltrans, as one of their 3 statewide applications, did submit for the Cabrillo Pedestrian and Railroad project in the city of Santa Barbara. And so that's good news. The request is for $25 million for construction. And the reason why they picked it again is because it received favorable feedback from the United States Department of Transportation in the last cycle, so they picked it again, and we will know in a couple months on the award. Next slide, please. With that, the federal government is providing new opportunities under the recently passed bipartisan infrastructure law signed by President Biden. There is an existing program called Infra, which is focused on multimodal and freight projects. There are 2 new programs called Mega and Rural. So in total, there's about almost $3 billion available nationwide. The good news is that we are eligible for all 3 programs, and so we can apply for all 3 with 1 application. So this is something that the federal government is utilizing moving forward. The reason why we're eligible for the rural program is because our corridor is included in an urbanized area less than 200,000. Next slide, please. So with that, as we note in the staff report, we actually did reach out to US DOT staff once the notice of funding opportunity was released. So we had that call on April 13th. We presented the project and the need and asked some questions. The feedback that we did get was, well, we were going to go into this application submitting 1 segment. They would like to know what the full funding need is for the corridor. So with that, we recalibrated and looked at what our options were. As you recall, under Senate Bill 1 a couple months ago, we recommended that we submit an application for the fully remaining components of the corridor. And so what we're doing is we're replicating that with our federal application. So we are looking at options of submitting for the full request of $256 million, but enlisting the options that are fundable within the full request. But we are also giving the federal government another option of a different size request based on available funding and what their competitiveness is with the program of a single HOV segment, along with a couple of the other elements in the full application. So 1 application would be $256 to complete the corridor, and then the second application is for $67 million to fund 4D South, along with the Sheffield to Ortega connector and the Santa Barbara MTD electric buses, which will be utilizing the corridor. Today, our recommendation to your board, and USDOT was okay with this, is to submit both applications for their review. One thing I'd like to note, I know $256 million is a lot, but the reason why we're submitting that is because we're seeing greater benefits with completing the corridor with the benefit cost analysis, which is required, than submitting the single segment on its own. But the USDOT will see what our needs are, how we're benefiting, and then hopefully they can go with the path that they choose to, but we obviously hope that it's for the full $256 million. Next slide, please. So the next steps are, we are feverishly working on applications right now. They're due May 23rd. We will be in Washington, D.C. In early June. So the timing is nice because the RAISE application is in, and then our MEGA application will be in, so we can talk about the benefits. And then we will know in 2 to 3 months on the MEGA application. Next slide, please. There's a lot going on, directors. So next month, we will be looking to open on segment 4A in Carpinteria, which is great news. And then in August, we will know from Caltrans on our applicant status for the Senate Bill 1 applications. So our fingers are crossed that we are co-applicant for both the freight and the congested corridors, which means more opportunities to fully fund. On the federal front, we closed on our TIFIA loan in August, which is for segments 4A through 4C. The California Transportation Commission will be back in town for the first time since 2006. They make the ultimate decision on the Senate Bill 1 applications. So we are actually presenting them with all the work that we're doing in the corridor before we submit the applications in December. So it's an opportunity for them to see it, and then we get to submit the application. And then after that, commission staff will be reviewing the application. So once that happens, we really can't do much more in terms of sharing information. And then in May, after commission staff has reviewed the Senate Bill 1 Cycle 3 applications, they will make their recommendations to the commission for approval in June. So as you can see, a lot is going on. We're working closely with our partners and continuing to advocate for the corridor as much as we can. Next slide, please. We did want to thank the team. There are a lot of folks who are putting in blood, sweat, and tears to get the corridor fully funded and completed. So we wanted to thank SBCAG staff, Caltrans, and our remaining consultant team with Point C, Kimley Horn, Gus Corey and Associates, and Thomas Walters. Corey Consulting and Tom Walters and Associates. With that, thank you for your time, and we'd like to receive your input and direction on the federal applications. Thank you.
Director Hart?
Well, it makes perfect sense to me. I think it's a great opportunity that the federal government makes it even an option that we can go for a single and had a home run potentially at the same time. So good news.
Director Rouse?
Yeah, I think it's particularly exciting because I would love to see this project happen within my natural lifetime. So I'm excited about this. So I'm definitely in favor.
Director, comments or questions from Zoom?
Chair Williams, I see no request to speak.
Well, I also think this is great moving ahead. Even if we got that 67, it would sure help with the CTC application, since that's been the dominant part of behind all of our conversations is how does this help us or hurt us with the big bucks that we ask for from the state. So it would be wonderful. Can I get is there public comment on this item?
Chair Williams, we have no request for public comment.
Then can I get a motion?
Yeah, move staff recommendation.
Second.
There is a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Director Hart?
Aye.
Hartman?
Aye.
Lavanino?
Aye.
Eurig?
Aye.
Julian?
Aye.
Osborne?
Aye.
Patino?
Aye.
Kasdan?
Aye.
Clark?
Aye.
Rouse?
Aye.
And Chair Williams.
Aye.
Motion passes 11-0.
Then we are on to the director's report.
Yeah, you skipped the 1 minute reports.
1 minute's reports. Maybe that was
Some-
purposeful. Does anybody really need to have a 1 minute report?
No.
Seeing none. Director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, members of the board. I want to thank you all for approving the annual report. It was under your consent agenda. It's a beautiful report, and it also includes the infograph that was first infograph that we've had at the suggestion of our Measure A committee to summarize all the accomplishments of Measure A and what we've done with the funding since its inception. So I think that was a great addition to the report. Lauren will be distributing these. If you need extra copies, just please let her know. The Broadband Strategic Plan project continues to make progress and has entered our engagement phase. The team conducted its first public workshop last week in Lompoc and will be conducting 2 more next week, Santa Maria and San Ynez Valley. And we were on the agenda for Santa Barbara next Tuesday, but I think that's getting pulled, so that to be determined of a next step. in the next date. We do have our website, sbcag.org/broadband, for a complete schedule of all of our public events. A few weeks ago, we were notified that we received a grant to update our public transit human services transportation plan. This plan is to identify social services providing transportation to the elderly and handicapped. We got $125,000 for this grant. The purpose of the grant is to identify efficiencies that could improve transit service for those who rely on those services by those small providers, and see if there's any coordination and consolidation that can be done. So those are mostly provided by nursing homes or adult day out programs or disabled programs. So we should get that project underway this summer. That we also reviewing draft guidelines for the regional early action planning grants. This is the housing funding that we talked about a few months ago. The draft guidelines were released earlier this month. We continue to prepare the implementation program that will require a robust public process. The final guidelines we should get in May, but through this program, we anticipate having $5.3 million to fund transformative projects which reduce vehicle miles traveled. And the list of eligible uses is fairly broad, so we can include housing and housing type projects or development plans as such. So we will see those the funding come down and decisions be made in the second half of 2022. I also want to give a plug for Traffic Solutions. We're reaching out to employers who are very interested in reducing their employees' costs for gas and reducing their trips that are traveled to and from their employment locations, and to help retain employees moving forward. So we can provide those consulting services to those employers, and we are thrilled to add another employee to our Traffic Solution team. Peter Williamson just started a couple weeks ago. He's joined this team and comes with more than 8 years of transportation demand management experience and applying the strategies and policies to help influence commuters' transportation decisions to use transit, ride sharing, walking, biking, or teleworking. He also has a bachelor's degree in experience management from Cal Poly, so he's from the Central Coast, and he's excited to join our team. He's also become a new father, so he's learning as he goes with that as well. But he also lives in Aurora Grande, is that correct? He lives in Aurora Grande, and he is commuting. But we do have a very generous teleworking packages. We ask employees to come in twice a week, and they can telecommute those remaining days. But he's also using the Clean Air Express to get down to the work when he does come into the office. So he's living and breathing and walking the walk and talking the talk. So we appreciate him at this addition to our team. So with that, I'll pass it back over to the chair. Thank you.
Any questions from board members? Do we have a Caltrans report this month?
Yes, we do.
Right.
All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Scott Eads here again for Tim Gubbins. I just have a couple items. One is just wanted to say appreciate the continued partnership on the funding applications in the Santa Barbara 101 corridor. We have a really excellent team, and the applications have really been first rate, and there's a lot of funding opportunities coming down the line, and so that work is really important. And so we look forward to continuing to partner with SBCAG and their staff and the consultant staff on that. Second thing I want to highlight is we responded in a letter. It's in your packet. April 11th is the letter date to questions that came up at the last meeting by Director Patino and Director Julian. So please see that. I won't go into details, but we did address several of the items that came up last time that I did not have full answers for at the time. And then Margie stole some of my thunder on the Sustainable Transportation Planning grants. I did want to highlight one more though, and that is that AMBAG received $300,000 for a California Central Coast or I should say, Central Coast Sustainable Freight Study. So that will help us to have a better understanding of freight movements within the Central Coast. And that kind of information is also really useful when we're putting together funding applications, when we're able to gather some compelling and quantitative data to be used in those applications and to help us plan for the future. So I have happy to take any questions.
Directors?
Director Williams, or Chair Williams, Director Patino would like to have a question, and then Director Hartman following her.
Director Patino.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the letter, Mr. Eads. However, on the first one where the 101 and 166, I was concerned about the off-ramp off of Broadway onto 101 at the bridge that is dangerous. So it wasn't the connection or the lights on 166. And secondly, the permits application for the cameras, we still haven't heard anything from Caltrans. This is a real, I can't express enough what an important thing it is to the city of Santa Maria. As I said before, we had a homicide. Had we had those cameras up where we wanted them, we could have caught the person. And then on the riverbed, underneath the river bridge, we were told, I think at the last meeting I expressed that we were told like in 2 weeks, and that was 1 week into the 2 weeks, that Caltrans would be in there doing the cleanup. We went in and did the cleanup with the help of the sheriffs from San Luis County, and we still haven't heard back from Caltrans when they will be there. They've not been there. They have not contacted us. And you don't have to write another letter. You can just give me a phone call, and we would just really like to know, because people are pushing on us in Santa Maria and very upset. They think it's my fault that it's not getting done. They think that your jurisdiction is my fault. I should be in there cleaning up. And so a phone call would be very welcomed on both of those items. Thank you. And I will, oh, on an up note, I do want to thank you for 135. They're putting in the ADA ramps on the corners. That's working just great. And pretty soon we will have that seal put all the way down Broadway from Prescott to Lakeview. And I want to thank you very much.
Director Patino, through the chair, if I could. Yes, we will follow up with you directly to make sure we're all clear on informational needs and what we can do to work together on the encampment issues and cleanup.
Thank you. Thank you.
Director Hartman?
Yes, Scott, I sent you an email from some constituents concerned that the construction on Cathedral Oaks is backing up traffic on the 101 in a dangerous way between Stork and Los Caneros. And we haven't heard back, but we are getting additional concerns expressed. And I think Director Kasdan will weigh in on this too from Galita's perspective. So I wonder if you could give us a sense of how we would get an answer. I know for me at least, your agency is very complex, and I value greatly that you help us navigate through, but then I'm not sure what happens next. So, and I think Director Kasdan would like to comment, would allow.
Director Kasdan.
Okay, thank you. I guess I would point out first that this has been a long-standing problem, that the traffic backs up in that off-ramp for, I don't know, half a mile at rush hour. It's just a routine accident. I mean, they're inevitably happening, and sooner or later we're going to get a really catastrophic one, because there's just this long string of cars. And I gather before the pandemic, there was an interest in evaluating sort of vegetative solutions of trimming hedges to see if that was going to do something. Given the volume of cars that back up, it's hard for me to imagine that that alone is a solution. The problem right now is exacerbated, of course, because of the additional traffic that's being pushed onto the 101 as opposed to Cathedral Oaks during the construction. But we have an existing problem that needs to be dealt with, and it shouldn't be postponed. Thank you. And thank you for raising it, Director Hartman.
So, Mr. Chair, I can respond if you'd like me to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Eads.
So, first of all, from what we have received the email, we're looking into it. It's bouncing around within different functional units, trying to gather information, make sure we have an accurate assessment. But from what I understand so far, the construction activities that are occurring are actually a city project. So it's up to the city to manage that construction project, do night work, whatever it takes to reduce delays, especially if it's spilling back onto the main line. If there's, that is a safety issue for us, and we don't want to have that happen. So we're happy to coordinate further with the city if there's questions about ways to manage that construction process. But from what I understand, that is a city construction process on city streets. In terms of the other increase in volumes that we're seeing over time at this location, we have commented on a number of development review proposals by the city that are moving forward through environmental processes and development processes. Those are approved by the city. We always comment on with recommendations on trying to reduce vehicle miles of travel with whatever mitigation and design features they can include in those projects, and to look ahead to what other type of operational improvements might be needed as traffic increases over time. So I'm not sure exactly what measures the city has taken, but that's an ongoing theme in this area, is desires to recognize that as we approve developments in this area, we will continue to see an increase in volumes unless it's, those trips are somehow mitigated in other ways. And so that our understanding is that's part of what we're seeing here, is just an overall increase in volumes over time, trying to use that ramp. In terms of what Caltrans has done recently, my understanding is that we did remove a tree on the ramp. There has been some challenges with that very long northbound off ramp. And so we've been studying that, trying to see what can be done to make sure that it works efficiently, so that at least is not exacerbating problems in the area. So I understand that we have removed some trees to try to improve sight distance. We'll continue to evaluate that and make additional changes if we can, if sight distance restrictions haven't improved to the degree we hope it will. I'll stop there.
Any other directors? I just want, go ahead.
Actually, Director Kasdan has his hand raised, and so does Director Urig, who has his hand raised
Let's
for
go to
quite a while.
Director Urig, and then Kasdan, if he keeps it up, then we'll call on him again.
All right, thank you, Chair. I just want to thank Scott for pushing through, or Scott and the staff at Caltrans for pushing through the encroachment permits that we're a little late in coming to you for our special events coming on May 7. We have those, the Wine Country Half Marathon in the morning, and then the Rancheros Visitadores are coming in the afternoon, 2 different detours, 2 different plans. And I just appreciate you guys working with the City of Solvang, our Public Works Director, to get those encroachment permits through. And then just lastly, congratulations to Mr. Williamson on the birth of his child, and welcome to SBCAG.
Director Kasdan?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that it isn't just a short term, that it isn't just this because of construction in the city of Goleta that we have this problem, that there's a long-standing and significant problem. And the trees, it's fine to do that. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's a bigger problem than that, because we're talking about cars that are backed up a half a mile or more, and that on the freeway, and you just can't have cars stopped in the freeway and expect that you won't have an accident occur at some point. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
And if I could, through the chair, just say we are more than happy to partner with the city, to continue to study what the true needs are there, what can be done. Caltrans has limited funding in terms of the type of improvements that we're able to do through the shop. But if there's things that we can do through our safety program or through our shop, to the degree they're qualifying, we're more than interested in continuing to work with the city. This is a multifaceted issue. I think if our understanding is correct in terms of the development being a big driver here, the temporary issues in terms of construction stuff, we'll work that through, and We're continuing to look at that ramp and make it work as efficiently as possible. But ultimately, those vehicles do get to the signal. And if there's just more vehicles than that signal can handle, then we've ended up with the reality that there's just there's more demand there than we have the ability to move through the intersection. And that's where we have to start looking at other improvements.
I also have one, just a heads up, Mr. Eads, I've asked your staff in the corridor, the construction corridor, to just provide, I've seen my own staff's calculations for the flood level rise that would take place from the addition of sound walls in the western part of the Montecito segment, where the flood risk has been highlighted. But we don't have a calculation of what that rise would be if it was staggered walls, and if staggered are not feasible because we don't own enough right-of-way, if there is the possibility of right-of-way, meaning is it you don't have right-of-way because we won't give you right-of-way, or is it just there's not enough room for the width of the whole corridor? So just would love to have an analysis of the staggered walls and the understanding of what other issues are presented by the issue of staggered walls. Sort of before we see this fade away into the sunset, I think the public needs to know, what if alternatives are feasible, and if not, why.
Okay. In response to that, Mr. Chair, I'm not as immersed in the details as I used to be on the specifics of the project. I know our team is working on that. I will say that it is a tightly constrained corridor with in terms of right-of-way, and if we needed to purchase right-of-way in order to put in sound walls, then that does figure in, and any utilities that would typically need to be relocated, or frontage roads that would need to be displaced and relocated, all those costs would come into the cost-benefit analysis that's associated with the sound wall, and then that's back to the federal protocol, which requires that it has to meet a certain cost-benefit threshold to be able to use federal funds on the project. So I suspect that we'll run into that quickly, but there may be areas where the right-of-way is accommodating enough to be able to do it, and I know the team is certainly committed to exploring it. The other thing I would say is, we are using the floodway analysis that the county asked us to use, and it is a very conservative scenario based on an event that was very conservative, and we understand what has happened and the desires to avoid anything of that nature in the future. But that's part of the driver here, is that we're looking at an event that is very, very unlikely to occur again, but nonetheless, we all want to make the right decisions, and so we'll continue to coordinate with the county on that, and I'll convey your interest to the team, make sure that they're following up. Thanks.
We understand that it could be interpreted as conservative, though the flood control staff maintains that there's been either 2 or 3 rain events that would trigger this in the last 40 years. So that's, that may be conservative, but not but not out of the realms of what we will deal with in the future. So but understanding of the different calculations, I think, would be important so that the public is, this process has some transparency to the public. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Eads? We just really appreciate, Mr. Eads, your dialogue here and your willingness to give us explanations and not just saying, hey, we'll look at that, see you later. That your dialogue here has been really important and helpful for the public. We thank you. Item 13, committee meetings report. Director Hart.
LoSAN had a board meeting last week, and unfortunately, there's been some very significant and unfortunate events. The Orange County Transportation Authority, that is the managing agency for LoSAN, terminated the executive director of LoSAN without any consultation whatsoever. And in fact, coincidentally, after the executive committee of LoSAN recommended that the board consider new governance options for the LoSAN agency because of frustration with the Orange County Transportation Authority's unwillingness to renegotiate the operating agreement that has conflicts with the bylaws. So there's a lot of drama, and the outcome of the meeting on Monday was that the Orange County Transportation Authority will hire independent conflict counsel to assist the LoSAN board in working through these governance issues. And so optimistically, there's, I think, a path for everybody to figure out a way to collaborate better, and that would help assist in the smooth operation of the rail system in Southern California.
Thank you for the report. Any questions on the report? I'm thankful that you'll be there for a little longer. Item 14. Item 14 is communications, so there's no report. But if anybody has any questions about that, they can go up to Margie after the meeting. And then item 15 will be adjourned to May 19th, 2022, beginning at 10 a.m.